Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Professor Lei. So this video, we will mainly talk about the first chapter within this semester, all right? So in this chapter, we will mainly talk about the big picture about operations management world, all right? We will start from, talking about what is operations management, why operations management is quite important, and what are some important areas within operations management to give you a better sense about what is the operations management this whole area looks like. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. I do expect every one of you to at least go through the textbook before start look at the chapter slides with the support of chapter video. Okay, and if you have any question during the learning process, feel free to let me know. All right, now let's start. So here I basically just list some important learning objectives of this chapter. As you can clearly see here, we start from talking about, for example, definition, the role of the operations, all right? Why operations management is so important, why we need to learn this whole area, okay? That's the first question that we need to figure it out. And then based on that, we start to look at the process, the whole operations process, okay? In this whole process, actually, it will include the inputs like raw material, like employee, facilities, all right? And then we will discuss about the process, how we produce the product, how we provide the services, okay? And then we move to the outputs, okay, which can be products, which can be services, and whether customer are satisfied about the no matter products or services, depending on the industry type, okay? We will also talk about some information flow during this whole process and discuss about, no matter the supplier, the customer, or the production employee. Okay, so we basically will stand from different perspective to look at the whole operations process. Okay, and then of course for every single element, it can be a very important area that we need to dig into and look at how we make the whole process more efficient. All right, now we always talk about operations management, but another important term that we always mention is called supply chain management. Okay, we will talk about what is the common part of the operations management and the supply chain management, and what is the key difference between these two. I can tell you guys that actually these two terms are highly integrated with each other, but still they have some key difference here. Okay, so in order to get a better sense about the whole operations management fields, it's better to understand both terms, okay, at the beginning, all right? We will just talk about it in a second. Then we take it back a little bit, all right? We all know that a company must have its corporate strategy, but how to make sure that, the operation strategy can be consistent with the overall corporate strategy and also this market analysis. All right, so this will also need some qualitative factors and quantitative methods to achieve it. All right, we will give you a big picture in this introductory chapter, but later on, when we talk about some specific sub-area within operations management fields, we'll give you a better sense about how we make it consistent. All right, now we will also identify some competitive priorities used in operations strategy. We will talk about some latest trend in operations management. We will introduce a few quantitative methods, okay, within the operations management to give you a better sense about how make the whole operations management more efficient. Okay, we'll just talk about it in a second. Now, let's start from the beginning. What is operations management? Okay, here, of course, you can clearly see the definition of the operations management, but I really want to emphasize is that, okay, first of all, okay, this is an operational process. Okay, it includes a design, direction, monitor, control. Okay, but the core elements that we include within this process is to transform the inputs into output. That's actually very straightforward and clear, right? So what can be the inputs? Raw materials, right? If you want to produce products, raw materials can be inputs, facilities, equipment, even labors. These are all inputs. But what we want to achieve, we want to get some outputs, right? Before we can sell to the customer. What can be the outputs? Products, services, these are the outputs. All right. So we basically, the operational process is to basically, first of all, with some inputs, necessary inputs, we try to produce, we try to provide services in order to get the outputs in order to fit for the market demand. okay, the customer needs, all right? And our goal is to basically make this operational process as efficient as possible. That's why we need to design it more appropriately. We need to monitor it more efficiently, okay? So this will be a core idea of what is operations management. Now, continue with that idea, you can see that, of course, operations management itself is monitoring the process, all right? That's why here you see, as long as this activity or group of activity take one or more than inputs, all right, and provides one or more outputs, okay, itself can be viewed as process. So operations management itself is monitoring the whole operational process, okay, and the key elements would be transforming the inputs into the qualified outputs. Okay, so this is pretty much the core idea of the operations management. All right. So as a beginning, as I said, so the two terms, operations management and also the supply chain management, okay, these two terms are quite important, okay? They are highly integrated with each other. They have huge common parts, although they still have some key differences, okay? I suppose that every one of you already looks through the textbook. You may still a little bit confused about what is the key difference here, okay? Don't worry, let me make it very clear to you guys. First of all, for the operations management side, all right, it's more focusing on improving the internal operational efficiency, okay, by transforming, the input to the output. Okay, then what is the key difference regarding to the supply chain management? Okay, supply chain management is more focusing on the external collaboration, okay, between your firm and your, for example, your supplier or the firm with the customers. Okay, so it's still trying to make the operational efficiency as efficient as possible, but it's more focusing on improving the collaboration between supplier and firm and the customer. Okay, so basically this is more focusing on the external, or we'll always say the horizontal side. Okay, but for the operations management, it's more focusing on the internal, or we call it vertical side. Okay, but the overall, no matter it's operations management or supply chain management, okay, all the things are included with a more big picture of operations management fields. Okay, so that's why both sides are quite important. Okay, yeah, that's why here, if you look at the supply chain management definition, yeah, so this is defined as the synchronization of the firm's process with those of its suppliers and customers to match the flow. You see, it's still the flow of transforming the materials, transforming the by using the facilities, by employing the workers to reach the outputs, for example, the services or products. Okay, but it's more focusing on the horizontal or the external collaboration between you and your supplier and a customer. But back to the operations management, it's more focusing on the internal, or we call it vertical side. Okay, so hopefully you already understand. But if you have any question, feel free to let me know. All right. Now, after we introduce the core idea of operations management and also supply chain management, let's take back a little bit. Okay, once we stem from the big picture of the whole corporate perspective. Okay, what is the specific role of operations in our organization? Here you can clearly see this figure, which shows you, our internal circle of the different functionalities within our organization. Okay, this is actually very straightforward and very simple. Normally, when a company try to produce a product in order to fit for the customer needs, or provide some service in order to fit for customer needs, it needs money first, right? Normally, the finance department will acquire some financial resources or capital in order to purchase, no matter raw material, facilities, equipments, or recruit employees before they can start to start the production, no matter production process or service process, right? So that would be the first thing that we start. After we have this inputs, no matter raw materials or facilities, as I said, then operations department will start to use the most efficient process to transform those raw materials. So by using the facilities and equipments to produce the products and the services in order to fit for the customer needs. All right, that's why here we move to the bottom side right here, all right? And after the company finished producing the product or is ready to provide services, okay, here you see that the marketing department come in, right? It will further improve the sales of the product, no matter product or services, all right? It will capture what is the core idea of the customer's needs, okay, in order to get a better sales of the overall, no matter products or services, okay? And during this whole process, you can see that there are many supporting functionalities, for example, accounting, information system, human resources, or engineering. So you can clearly see that different functionality, all of them plays a very important role in order to achieve the overall corporate strategy. And of course, here, operations management is also playing a very important role, very essential role, okay? It makes everything realized, basically. Now, let's continue. So if we go back to the operations process, okay, exactly as I just mentioned, all right, you can clearly see here, okay, within the operations process, the most important thing are, you see, at this side is inputs, and then we go through the operations process in order to get the outputs, all right? And what are the common elements of the inputs? Of course, workers, managers, equipment, facilities, materials, land, energies, all right? All these materials that is necessary for you to finally achieve the outputs. These can be included within the input, right? What we are doing here is try to basically make the operational process as effective as possible, as efficient as possible in order to get the outputs. And once you get outputs, okay, there basically will have two different feedback. One is called internal feedback, which is information on performance, all right? So during the whole production or service process, of course, you can have certain monitoring process for you to basically monitor the whole procedure, okay? What is the quality, okay? What is the period time, those kind of different measures. It will help you to understand whether your operational process is good enough or it still needs further improvement, okay? And on the other hand, it also have external feedback, right? Because your output will deliver to the customer finally, right? So no matter the internal or external customers, they will give you their feedback, whether they think this, this product is already satisfactory or it still needs to be better improved, right? So no matter internal feedback or external feedback, it will go back to the beginning of the whole process, operational process. And the manager or the workers, they will decide whether they would like to basically improve certain perspective in order to make it more satisfactory or make it more higher qualified to the customers. Okay, so this will be the whole operational process, which is very standard and straightforward. All right, yeah, this will basically to repeat the same thing that I just mentioned. Comes to the very specific different section of the operational process, we can further separate into service process or manufacturing process, which is obviously depending on your final output, right? If you are providing the services, definitely this relates to the service products process. And if you are producing product, it's more related to the manufacturing process. Here are just simply listing, several characteristics corresponding to no matter the manufacturing process or service process. Okay, so of course, if it's related to producing products, or finally, if we call the manufacturing, if we correspond to the manufacturing process, all right, the corresponding output normally would be physical, is durable output, right? That's very straightforward. For example, you're producing a computer, it should be physical and a durable output, right? And normally it can be inventoried, right? Such that manufacturing process are more, related to the inventory management. We'll talk about that in a later chapter, all right? Relatively, it may need lower customer contact compared to service process, all right? And it may have longer response time, and it's more capital intensive, and the quality itself is easier to measure compared to the service process, okay? On the other hand, service process, normally the output is intangible, okay, because you're providing service, normally this output is intangible, and normally the output itself cannot be inventoried because, right, this real-time service normally, okay? And since this is related to service, the customer contact itself is more necessary, it's more important, okay, through this whole process. And it requires a shorter response time, okay? It's more labor intensive, which is very obvious. And the quality itself is a little bit harder to measure, right? Because different people may have different experience on even on the same, type of the service, okay? So this would be a quite straightforward difference between the manufacturing process and the service process. But no matter it's manufacturing process or service process, it's still based on the same information flow, right? From the input, and then we transform from the input to the output. And what we're doing here is trying to make the whole process as efficient as possible. Now, if we move to the supply chain view, okay, as I said at the beginning, right, they have very common parts, no matter you are looking at the process view or you're looking at the supply chain view, right? So here, still the same thing, basically, all right? So you clearly see that since we're talking about the collaboration among suppliers or your firm or your customers, right? So here, we start from the suppliers because they are providing you the supplies that you need to further produce or provide services for the further customers, right? So here, based on the external suppliers, the first thing that we need to consider is basically how we build up a healthy relationship with the suppliers. Okay, we need to monitor, we need to kind of evaluate our supplier, right? That would be the first thing. And then after that, after we get the raw material that we want, then we start to design the new service or product based on our, for example, corporate strategy, all right? And after that, right, after we design it, we start to basically produce the products that we really want, right? And that's basically going to this stage order fulfillment process, okay? Once all the products are done, okay, or once the service is ready, we basically will deliver to the customer, okay? And customer will definitely have their experience, have their feeling about what this product is, how this product is, and how the service is, right? So then we need to further maintain the relationship between customer and our firm. Customer definitely will give them their feedback about their experience of this product, and we can use that to further improve our product or service in order to better fulfill the customer needs. Okay, so this can be built as a cycle. And here you see the support process here is always here to basically make every single stage as efficient as possible. Okay, so basically here, for most of these different stages, we will talk about those in detail in later chapters. Here, we basically just give you a quick sense about what it is during this whole process. Okay, so yeah, so I won't spend much time to continue to talk about every stage. I already give you a good sense about in every stage what is exactly it's doing during this whole process. But if you have any question during this this whole procedure, please let me know. Okay, don't hesitate. Now let's continue for the supply chain processes. As I emphasized at the beginning, all right, supply chain process is more focusing on the collaboration, right? Horizontal collaboration among your supplier, yourself, and your customer, right? So that's why here you see the supply chain process here normally will include the external customers or suppliers. Okay, here I listed a few great examples. Since you are dealing with your suppliers, sometimes you must consider how you basically make the contract with your suppliers, right? It will relate to the contract management, and we will talk about that in the later chapters, right? And since you will, for example, purchase some raw material from the suppliers, you need to hold all those raw materials within your warehouse before you can start to produce your products, right? So you were dealing with the warehousing, and of course, from the other hand, since you will deal with the customers, you need to negotiate with the customer by using a more effective way, right? So we're related to the customer service, and since you will also deliver your product after you produce the product, you deliver to the for example, the retail store, it will also relate to this logistics. Okay, so that's why everything that I list here are related to the supply chain processes. Okay, but in the core idea is that basically this is the process that will collaborate among your supplier, yourself, and your customers. Okay, everything related to those relationships can be included within the supply chain processes. Okay, now for the operational strategy, this will include both your internal operational process and your external, the horizontal supply chain process. Okay, so this will be a very huge thing that we will deal with within the whole semester. Okay, now let's take a deeper view about the relationship between operational strategy and corporate strategy, and also the market analysis. Okay, so actually the underlying logic here is very simple. It's very straightforward. Okay, let's start to talk about this. So first of all, as I said at the beginning, so for the corporate strategy itself, it can be viewed as the big picture or the mission, or the overall statement for the corporate to achieve. All right, so that's why here you can see that normally the corporate strategy provides an overall direction that serves as the framework for different functions within the organizations. All right, but it also depends on both the external factors and internal factors. What can be some external factors? For example, environmental scanning, right? So for a company, before you can reach your corporate strategy, you have to first look at what is outside, for example, the economic environment, right? What is the current situation for a company within the whole industry, all right? So you have to consider that point of view. But on the other hand, there are also some internal factors. For example, here, what I list here is it can be core competencies, right? Since you are competing with your competitors within this whole market, right? You have to be very familiar with your own competencies. Okay, what is my strength and what is my weakness? Okay, regards to, for example, the experts, right? Do we have more experts compared to our competitors? Do we have more sophisticated facilities compared to our competitors? Do we have more, updated system and technology compared to our competitors? These are all factors that we have to consider. Okay, it depends on the industry, it depends on the specific firms. So the managers, CEO, CFO, they have to consider all these different kind of factors before they make the corporate strategy. Okay, now market analysis is another thing that we have to consider before we start to, before we can have a more competent operational strategy. So what is the core idea of market analysis? It's actually very simple, very straightforward. You have to understand what the customers need, what they want, how we can reach it, how we can achieve their satisfactory level, right? Because finally, we're trying to basically produce the product and provide service to the customer, for the customer, right? So we have to understand whether customer is satisfactory for the products that we produce, or whether customer needs some new things, right? So that's why before we start to implement the operational process, we also need to have a more clear market analysis, right? So you need to make assessments from different perspectives. Actually, we will talk about those different things in detail in a later chapter. But here, we'll give you some basic sense about what kind of things are within those assessments. For example, okay, you need to think about what is the appropriate price, okay? What is appropriate, or what is acceptable quality for your product or service, okay? For the delivery speed, these are also another factor you need to consider about, right? Normally, how much time you will need to, from your, for the shipment, right? Basically from your factory to the customer, okay? You can make it as soon as possible, but sometimes, the delivery speed also has some limit. You need to also consider the cost during the whole procedure. Okay, or the volume needs, okay? You may need to basically, even before you start to produce the product, you need to give some survey within the market and see, at least have a prediction about what is the market demand for the specific product before you buy the raw material, you you recruit some employee to produce it, right? So that's why the market analysis normally will be the first thing that we need to do before we start to do the operational process, okay? Yeah, here I just provide a few important terms that we frequently will encounter within this whole process. Okay, I know all these concepts are a little bit fragmented because this is the first chapter. We have a few different terms that I really like you guys to understand, to have at least have a sense about different things. So, but later on when we move to the later chapters, we will see all those different terms repeatedly, okay? But here, just keep in mind, what is the core idea of different concepts, okay? For example, what I just mentioned, corporate strategy, the operational strategy, market analysis, okay? What they means and what are the relationship among different terms. For example, here, the competitive priorities and the competitive capabilities, okay? So the key difference between these two terms are very straightforward and very simple. Let me help you illustrate this. So first of all, the competitive priorities is more focused on illustrating the key characteristics that you really want to put on your products or services. Okay, so as I said at the previous slides, right? Firms really needs to be very familiar with the core competencies that can help them beat their competitors. And this should also should provide a nice market analysis before they start to do any production, any operational process. Okay, so the competitive priorities basically is expressing this idea. Okay, what are the critical dimensions? What are the key characteristics that can help our firm survive within the market? Okay, based on our products or services. And on the other hand, competitive capabilities are basically those important limitations that we have to understand, that we have to keep that in our mind when we produce our product or provide our services, right? We don't actually have unlimited resources. Our resources are limited for every firm, right? No matter it's cost or quality or time or flexibility, all these dimensions, they actually are limit us to basically provide a perfect, product or provide perfect service to a customer. Okay, we're trying our best to improve our product in order to fulfill customers' need, but still it cannot be perfect because of all these different limitations. So competitive capabilities is basically illustrating this idea from the this limitation point of view. Okay, now let's move to the next slide. So another pair of terms are called order winners and order qualifiers. Okay, these two terms are also highly related, but also different. Let me help you understand the key difference between the two terms. I would like to start from the order qualifiers. Okay, order qualifiers means that, okay, for example, if you are a customer, okay, when you walk into a retail store, okay, you may have 10 different alternative products in front of you, okay? At the beginning, okay, you may already rule out, for example, 6 out of these 10, okay, and remain 4 alternatives on the table. The reason, okay, that you exclude those 6 can be price, can be quality, can be, whether it looks very nice, those kind of things, right? So order qualifiers are basically those specific characteristics that will help you to rule out, certain alternatives among all. Then what is the order winners? Very simple. Finally, since you only want to buy one product, right? Right now you have 4 alternatives, okay? You need to basically pick up one out of these 4 alternatives. Okay, that's your targets. So finally, you probably just pick up one of them based on the most important characteristic that will lead you to rule out the other 3 alternative products. Okay, so this most important characteristic definitely is depending on your own personality. It's depending on, for example, the product characteristic. Okay, depend on many different factors. So that's why, as a firm, okay, if you can understand, the overall customer's needs, it will much more helping you to basically, first of all, survive from, all different alternatives, okay? Become an order qualifier. And then you can even win from all products provided by your competitors. You will become the order winners. Okay, so order qualifier, order winner, there are two stages. You first want to survive as order qualifier, and then you want to win as order winner. Okay, now let's move to the only quantitative method that we will cover within this specific chapter. Okay, so you still remember that through the whole chapter, I'm always emphasizing the operational process, right? It's actually transferred from input to the final output, right? Then people may naturally have the question. So I know this is the operational process. We have the input first, and then we use the operational process to transform it to the output. But how we can know whether this is effective or whether this is efficient enough? Okay, here we provide a very simple way to kind of help us measure the efficiency of the operational process. Okay, you can clearly see here we use the term called productivity, and basically the equation here is very, very simple, right? Productivity equals output divided by input. Okay, so but here I would like to use a few nice examples to help you get a better sense about how we can basically use this equation, okay, to measure the operational efficiency in those specific business applications. Okay, now let's from the first example. Now, in this specific example, if I wanted you guys to calculate the productivity for this following operations, basically you have 3 employees process 600 insurance policies in a week, and they work 8 hours per day for 5 days per week. Okay, what is the corresponding labor productivity? Okay, here I didn't actually write down the full question here, but if I'm asking you, what is the labor productivity for this specific operational process? Okay, what can be the correct answer here? Okay, actually very straightforward. Okay, keep in mind productivity equals to output divided by input. Okay, what is the output here? The output are those completed insurance policies, right? You clearly see that here 3 employees process 600 insurance policies in a week. All right, so this 600 insurance policies, this will be the output that 3 employees can complete within a week. Okay, and what are the corresponding input? It definitely would be the work that provided by those employees, right? Because the employee, they have to do this in order to complete these policies. Okay, so here, the unit that we will use is employee hours, right? So basically to measure how much time did they spend on these insurance policies. So for 3 employees, okay, in a week, how many hours they actually need to use in order to complete these 600 insurance policies? It's very easy to move forward, right? First of all, we know every one of them work 8 hours per day, okay? 5 days per week. So in total, this is how many hours for every one of them? It should be 40 hours for every one of them, right? 8 times 5. So remember, this is for every employee. But how many employees do you have? You have 3 employees. So that's why here you use 3 times 40 to get your employee hours, okay? Which would be 120. And remember, this would be your input. What is the units of this input? 120 hours for 3 employees. Okay, so this would be the input, and the numerator would be the output, right? Which would be 600 insurance policies. So that's why you use this 600 divided by 120 to get its 5 policies per hour. This will become the productivity. Okay, very straightforward and very simple. If you have any question, feel free to let me know. Okay, now let's go to the second example. This example, it looks a little bit more difficult, but the core idea here is exactly the same. We're trying to monitor the operational efficiency by using the productivity. Still, keep in mind, what is the corresponding equation? Productivity equals to output divided by input. But the most important thing here that you need to be very careful about is what is the unit of the output? What is the unit of the input? So the unit that we use for both output and input in this specific example would be dollar value, as I show here. Okay, but it doesn't mean that in all of the examples, the unit for both input and output has to be dollar value. It can be just, for example, for the output, it can be just the amount, okay, number of the products. Okay, now let's get back to this specific example. Now, since we are talking about, we are trying to calculate the productivity, all right? So if we are talking about the dollar value of the output, how we calculate this? Remember, in this specific context, okay, the team of the workers makes 400 units of products, okay? But this would be the number of the product, right? But since I want the unit for the output is dollar value, then we need to further times the, basically, for every unit, what is the market price for that? All right. So in order to get the correct value of the output, you need to use 400 times $10 for each unit, right? So that's why it's 400 times 10, which is 4,000. Okay. So here in this specific example, I will specify that the output unit would be dollar value. That's why here you see the output is $4,000. Okay. The output value is $4,000. And then we need to look at the input. Okay, so input, let's see. The accounting department reports that for this job, the actual costs are 400 for labor, 1,000 for materials, and 300 for overhead. Okay, and since I'm calculating multi-factor productivity, it's not just for labor, it's not just for material, it's not just for overhead, we're calculating the multi-factor productivity, then the input should basically include all these different elements. And that's why you see when you calculate the input based on the dollar value input, all right, dollar value unit, then the input should be 400 plus 1,000 plus 300. That's why in total it should be $1,700. Okay, very straightforward, right? So that's why here you see by having output and input, you can clearly calculate the multi-factor productivity, which is 2.35. Okay, now, for example, within the this example, all right, if instead of specify the unit for output is dollar value showing here, right? Instead of using dollar value as the unit for output, if I just use the product amount at the output, how we calculate the whole process? Very simple, all right? We don't actually need to change anything related to input since if I just change the unit for output, right? So then instead of using 400 times $10 per unit, you directly just use 400 units because here, since we just use the product amount as the output, then 400 units would be the correct one. Okay, so that's why then you use 400 divided by this $1,700 in order to get the right productivity. Okay, what I'm emphasizing here is that basically the unit and for output, no matter output or input, it can be flexible. It depends on the question context. Okay, it depends on how I ask you that question. Okay, so make sure you exactly understand what it is the unit for output and what is the unit for input within one specific question. Here, as I said, we use dollar value as the unit for both output and input. Okay, yeah, I will skip this another simple example, okay, because I really want you guys to practice yourself. All right, I do expect every one of you to practice this simple example yourself by looking at the following two slides. All right, but if you have any question during your calculation process, feel free to let me know. Okay, every question that I list here actually is a great practice chance for you to understand the key set here. But still, the key equation that we will use would be very simple, right? Productivity equals output divided by input. But keep in mind, be careful about units. All right. Okay, so I will also detailedly illustrate this specific problem. This specific problem is still related to the productivity. Let's look at this specific problem, okay? I think probably this type of the problem is probably it would be the already the hardest type of the problem related to productivity. So as long as you understand the key sense related to the productivity calculation, okay. So for example, this type of problem, I think it will be not that hard for you to figure it out. Okay, let's start to talk about this specific problem. So this problem is related to student tuition at this university, and the tuition we know is $150 per semester credit hour. The state supplements school revenue by 100 per semester credit hour, and the average class size for a typical 3 credit course is 50 students. And then see, labor costs are $4,000 per class, material costs are $20 per student per class, and the overhead costs are $25,000 per class. Okay, and then the first question is, what is the multi-factor productivity ratio for this specific course process? Okay, and here I didn't explicitly specify the unit, but within exam, definitely I will specify it. And here we basically still use the dollar value as the unit for both output and input. Okay, actually you can clearly see right here. Okay, now we need to first calculate the output and also input before we can calculate the productivity, right? That's actually very standard. So let's first look at the output. Now we start from calculating the output value. Okay. Now how we calculate the output value given that? So first of all, we start from the university's perspective. All right. So the university output, okay, basically the source of the revenue basically come from two parts based on this context. One part is from the student tuition, another part is from the state supplements, right? So the student tuition here, as you can see here, we should be 150 per semester credit hour, all right? And similarly, the state supplement school revenue would be $100 per semester credit hour, okay? But what we want is the correct units that we want within this specific context would be per class. How to get that value? Very simple, right? First of all, this is 150 for student tuition, and this is $100 for state supplement school, right? So in total, it actually would be $250 per semester credit hour. But don't forget, within a class, okay, normally it would be a 3 credit course. It's not just 1 credit course, it's a 3 credit course, and it actually includes 50 students. So within a class, actually, the overall revenue for the university would be 250 because you add up these two numbers, right? And then 250 times 3 because this is a 3 credit course, and then times 50 because it not just includes 1 student, it includes 50 students. All right. So that's why here, if you look at their solved process, you can clearly see that you use 50 times 3 times basically the result of 150 plus 100. That will give you the value of output. Now, let's move to input. The input basically is corresponding to this sentence, all right? At a university, what can be the common input? Basically, you need to recruit employee, you need to incur material costs, you need to incur overhead costs, right? These are the 3 things that at least it mentions within this context, okay? And still, since the input value, the units is still the basically the per class, all right, per class. Then how we calculate the input value? Very simple. First of all, labor costs are 4,000 per class. Okay, so this already tells you this will be the part of the input value. Now, material costs are 20 per student per class. Okay, it's not directly per class, it's per student per class. But how many students within 1 class? 50, right? 50. So that's why here, for this part, in order to get the right corresponding value, you should use 50 times 20, which is 1,000. All right, so 1,000 should be the second part, right? Showing here, you see 20 times 50. So 4,000 would be the first part, 20 times 50 is the second part. What is the third part? Very easy, right? Overhead cost would be $25,000 per class. So that's why here, you see, 25,000 would be the surplus. And you simply just add them up, you get the input value. That's it, okay? After you get the output value and the input value, Very simple, right? Just use output value divided by input value. You will get the multi-factor productivity, which is 1.25. Okay. And students may ask, what is the exact meaning of this result productivity? By just looking at this number, it doesn't actually have the specific meaning. Okay, but how we can use this to basically test whether our operation efficiency is good or not. Basically, for example, this year, okay, for example, this is for, let's say, this academic year, okay, you get this result, which is 1.25. And for the previous academic year, or for the previous 2 years or 3 years or even 5 years academic years, you can get the corresponding productivity, right? So the right way to basically look at the productivity is to compare the same statistic for different academic year. Okay, for example, if this productivity is actually increasing all these years from, let's say, 0.95 to 1 and then to 1.05 and then to 1.15 until 1.25, then you know that actually this productivity is increasing all these years. Okay, so by just looking at this number, itself, it doesn't actually have the specific meaning, but you need to compare it with the, for example, previous years or the prediction for the future years. Okay, so this will be the reason here. Now, let's look at the part B. Now, part B shows that if instructors work an average of 14 hours per week, okay, for 16 weeks for each 3 credit class of 50 students, what is the labor productivity ratio? Okay, now what is the key difference between part A and part B? Very straightforward, very simple. So if you look at part A and part B, right? Part A is talking about the multi-factor productivity ratio, but part B is talking about labor productivity ratio. What is the key difference here? First of all, there's a common part, okay? The common part is basically the output value, all right? We don't actually change anything related to output value, but the key difference here is the input. If you look at part A, since part A is related to multi-factor input, right? So that's why here, when we calculate for part A, we also include labor costs, we include material costs, we also include overhead costs. But here, since we only care about labor productivity, that's why here, when we calculate this labor productivity, the input will only account related to labor, okay? And more specifically here, the unit that we would like to use for labor would be the labor hours, okay? How to calculate the labor hours? If you look at this, since the instructors, they work an average of 14 hours per week for 16 weeks. So what is the labor hours? Very easy to calculate, right? Just use 14 times 16 to get the labor hours. So that's why if you look at here, right, when we calculate input, it would be 14 times 16, okay, to get the input value, all right? And if you look at the output, when we calculate productivity, if you look at the output, still it would be $37,500. See, when you compare with the part A output value, is exactly the same. So that's why here, output value is exactly the same, but the input value will be different. And that's why when we calculate labor productivity, you see the result will be different. So this will be all the content of this chapter. Okay, I hope you guys already have a good sense about the overall operational process and know how to properly use productivity to basically monitor the operational efficiency. All right. If you have any questions during the learning process, feel free to let me know. See you guys.